careful traveler. I read reviews before I book. I check the host's history. I look at the photos against what I know about the area. I have stayed in probably 40 Airbnbs across different countries over the past several years, and I have never had a serious problem. I say this because what I found was not the result of carelessness. It was the result of someone who had been doing this long enough and carefully enough that the thing they were doing was very difficult to find. I was staying in a private room in a shared apartment for 4 nights while attending a work conference. The listing had over 60 reviews, all positive, and the host had been on the platform for 6 years. The room was clean, the amenities were what were advertised, and the host was friendly in the brief interaction we had when I arrived. I had no reason to look twice at anything. On the second night I was having trouble sleeping and I was lying in bed with my phone, and I noticed that the small clock on the bookshelf across from the bed was positioned at a slightly unusual angle, facing the bed more directly than a clock typically would be. I don't know why I noticed it. I notice things when I can't sleep. I got up and looked at it. The clock had a lens. Not a reflective surface, not a trick of the light, a lens, small, recessed into the face of the clock beside the display, pointing directly at the bed. I stood there for a moment and then I turned the clock around. On the back was a micro SD card slot and a small charging port. I did not touch the card. I put the clock face down on the shelf and sat on the bed and thought about what I was going to do. What I did first was look around the room more carefully. I found 2 more devices. A small USB charger plugged into the wall near the desk that had a pinhole camera in the face. And a smoke detector, not the building smoke detector, a separate one that had been placed on the shelf above the door, that was too light when I took it down, lighter than any smoke detector I had ever held, because it did not contain the components a smoke detector contains. 3 devices, all pointed at the bed or the desk, all recording. I took photographs of each one in place before I touched them. Then I took the SD card from the clock and checked it on my laptop. The card had footage going back 11 weeks. Not just my stay, 11 weeks of guests in that room. I did not watch more than a few seconds before I closed the file. I had seen enough to understand what was on it, and I did not want to watch it. I called the platform's emergency line. I called the local police. I moved to a hotel that night and did not go back. The platform suspended the listing within hours of my report. The police investigation identified the host and found that all 3 devices were connected to a home network that he accessed remotely. He had been watching the footage in real time, not just recording it. The SD card was for backup. He had 60 positive reviews. 6 years on the platform. 40-something guests in 11 weeks. I think about those guests. Most of them never knew. I only knew because I couldn't sleep and I notice things when I can't sleep, and I happened to notice the angle of a clock. I check every room now. Every stay, every device, every USB charger, every smoke detector. I know what a pinhole lens looks like. I know the weight of a real smoke detector versus a fake one. I know because I learned it in that room at 2 in the morning, and I will not unlearn it. I want to describe what it felt like to hold that smoke detector and feel how light it was, because I think that specific moment is when the full scope of it landed for me. Up until that point I had been operating in a kind of contained procedural mode, found a thing, documenting the thing, assessing the situation. The clock was alarming. The USB charger was alarming. But the smoke detector was when the scale of the planning became real. A clock at an unusual angle is something you might notice by accident. A USB charger with a pinhole camera is a product you can buy and install in minutes. But a fake smoke detector, one that looks exactly like a real one, that has been mounted in a position that gives a wide-angle view of the entire room, that has been there long enough to accumulate 11 weeks of footage, that is not an impulsive decision. That is infrastructure. That took time to source, time to install, time to calibrate the angle. That was built. The weight of it in my hand. That is the detail I have not been able to put down. I looked at the platform's response afterward, the public statement they put out about the incident. It described the situation using language designed to make it sound contained, an isolated case, action taken immediately, guest safety is our priority. I understand why they wrote it that way. What that language does not convey is 11 weeks. What it does not convey is 60 reviews from guests who had no idea. What it does not convey is the specific experience of sitting on the edge of a bed in a room you paid to sleep in and understanding that every moment of privacy you believed you had in that room was not real. I still use the platform occasionally for work travel when hotels are not available. I do not do it without checking the room first. I check systematically and I take my time and I do not stop until I'm certain. The process takes about 15 minutes. I do it every time. The police told me, when they closed their portion of the case, that the host had been on the platform long enough to have hosted in 2 other cities before this one. They were looking into whether similar devices had been used at prior properties. They did not tell me what they found. I do not need to know. I already know everything I need to know, which is this: 60 reviews. 6 years. 40-something guests in 11 weeks. 3 devices in 1 room. Careful does not mean safe. It means you find it before he does. There is one more thing I want to say about the other guests. The 40-something people who stayed in that room across 11 weeks. I think about them in a way that is difficult to describe, not pity exactly, because pity implies distance and what I feel is much closer than distance. I was one of them for 2 nights before I happened to find it. If I had slept better on that second night, if I had not been lying awake with my phone at 2 in the morning, if the clock had been positioned 2 inches further toward the wall, I would have left at the end of my stay and joined the roster of people who never knew. I would have written a positive review, probably. The room was clean. The host was friendly. There was nothing to complain about. That is what makes it difficult. The experience of staying there, absent the discovery, was genuinely fine. The horror was entirely invisible until it wasn't. 60 people wrote positive reviews because 60 people had a fine stay. The 61st found the clock. I was the 61st. That is the only reason I know. The platform sent me a settlement offer 3 weeks after I filed my formal complaint. I did not accept the first one. I tell you this not because the money matters, but because the speed of the offer tells you something about what they already knew was possible on their platform and how prepared they were for someone to find it. Check the smoke detectors. Pick them up. Feel the weight. A real smoke detector has components inside it: a sensor, a battery, an alarm mechanism. It is heavier than it looks. If you pick up a smoke detector in a rental and it feels like a hollow box, put it back exactly where you found it, take a photograph, and call the platform before you do anything else. That is the protocol I built after that night. It takes 3 seconds. It costs nothing. It is the 3 seconds I wish I had taken on the first night instead of the second. I lived in my apartment for 8 months before I understood what was happening. That is the part one keep returning to, not the discovery, but the 8 months before it. 8 months of believing I was living alone in a space that was private, that the sounds I heard from the apartment above were just the ordinary sounds of a neighbor going about their life, that the man who lived upstairs and occasionally nodded at me in the hallway was simply that. A neighbor. He had been there when I moved in. Had introduced himself on my second day, offered to help carry boxes, declined when I said I was fine. Polite. Forgettable. The kind of neighbor you acknowledge and then stop thinking about. I thought about him only in the way you think about the source of footsteps overhead, as context for sound, not as a person with any particular relevance to my life. The first thing that didn't fit happened about 3 months in. I ran into him at the mailboxes and he asked, conversationally, whether I had enjoyed the Thai place I'd ordered from the night before. I thought I must have mentioned it at some point, or that he had seen the delivery bag in the recycling, or something. I said yes and went upstairs and didn't think about it again. The second thing happened a month later. I came home from a weekend trip and he was in the lobby and he said, "Welcome back," as though he had been tracking my absence. When I said I had just been visiting family, he said yes, in Asheville, and he said it the way you say something you already know. I had not told him I was going to Asheville. It was not on any calendar he could have seen. I had not posted about it on social media. I went upstairs and sat down and went back through our previous interactions trying to find the moment I had mentioned Asheville. I could not find it. The third thing was worse. A week after the Asheville comment, I had a friend stay over for 2 nights. A week after she left, he asked me how her visit had gone. He knew her name. He said it, not your friend, her name. I had never introduced them. They had never met. I had not mentioned her name to him at any point that I could reconstruct. I called my landlord and asked, in the most neutral terms I could manage, whether there had been any complaints about the upstairs unit or any maintenance issues that had required access to my apartment. The landlord said no. I asked if there was any reason the upstairs unit would have visibility into my apartment. The landlord said no. I went through my apartment myself. I checked the obvious places, outlets, devices, the walls around the light fixtures. I did not find anything. What I found was in the closet, and I only found it because I was looking for a box I had stored on the top shelf, and I moved a section of the ceiling tile to reach it, and the tile lifted more easily than it should have because it had been cut. Above the cut tile, in the space between my ceiling and his floor, was a small device zip-tied to a pipe. A listening device. Battery-powered. The size of a thumb drive. I photographed it. I called the police. I did not confront him. The police found 2 additional devices, one in the bathroom vent, one in the living room ceiling, all installed through access points from the unit above. He had been listening to my apartment for an indeterminate period. The Asheville trip, my friend's name, the Thai delivery, all of it had come through those devices. He was charged. The charge is held. He had done it in a previous building as well, in a different city, with the same method and the same ceiling access. 2 tenants before me in a different city, same method, same access via the ceiling. I moved out the following week. I inspect every ceiling vent in every place I live now. I tap the ceiling tiles and closets when I move in. I know these things because I learned them in that apartment, and knowing them is the only version of that experience I get to keep. I want to describe what it felt like to have the 8 months recontextualized, because that process happened rapidly and completely the moment I found the device. Every interaction ran through my mind in a new light. The comment about the Thai delivery, he had heard me on the phone ordering. The Asheville trip, he had heard me making plans. My friend's name, he had heard me talking to her, probably many times, on calls in my own apartment. Everything I had said in that space that I believed was private had been audible to him. The specific violation of that is difficult to articulate to someone who hasn't experienced it, because it is not about any individual piece of information. It is about the totality of it. Your apartment is the place where you are most unguarded, where you have conversations you would not have in public, where you process things out loud, where you exist without performance. He had access to all of that. For 8 months. While I waved at him in the hallway and thought of him as a forgettable neighbor. The police detective who handled the case told me that listening devices of this type are inexpensive, easily obtained, and increasingly common in neighbor harassment cases. She said that the ceiling space between floors is one of the most under-examined access points in residential buildings because tenants rarely think to look there. She said the most common way people find them is by accident. I found mine by accident. I was looking for a box. I think about the version of me that didn't need the box that day. That version never moves the ceiling tile. Never finds the device. Never has the 8 months explained. Continues living in that apartment believing in the privacy of her own home, being listened to by the man upstairs, waving at him in the hallway. I was very close to being that version. The box is why I am not. The 2 previous tenants in the city had done this before. I learned their names from the case file, which I requested access to. I thought about reaching out to them. I did not. I do not know what they know or what they have had to process. I only know my own version of it, which is that I lived 8 months in a space that was not as private as I believed, and I know it now, and I cannot unknow it, and the ceiling vent inspection I do in every new place I live is the habit that 8 months built. Check the ceiling vents. Tap the tiles. Move the boxes. I want to add one more thing about the Asheville comment specifically, because it was the moment that shifted my understanding even before I found the device. He said the word with a specific confidence, not as a guess, not as a question, but as a fact being confirmed. That confidence is the tell. When someone knows something they should not know, they often cannot help delivering it with the weight of knowledge rather than the lightness of inference. He said Asheville the way you say a city you have heard said many times. The way it sits in your memory is a piece of established information rather than something new. I noticed it. I did not act on it for a month. That month is what I would change if I could change anything, not the discovery, which happened when it happened, but the gap between noticing something that did not fit and understanding what it meant. The gap between the first wrong thing and the investigation is a window. He had the full width of that window. I gave it to him without realizing I was giving it. The lesson I took from that gap is this: when something does not fit, the explanation does not have to be obvious before you begin looking. You do not need to understand the mechanism before you check the ceiling tile. Noticing is sufficient reason to look. The looking is what finds it. I waited for understanding before I looked, and the understanding arrived a month late. I do not wait anymore. I notice and I look. Immediately, without waiting for the explanation to arrive first. The explanation can come after. The looking comes first. That is the only order that works. I worked overnight security at a commercial warehouse for about 14 months. Not a glamorous job, mostly walking the floor on a set schedule, checking that the loading doors were secured, logging anything unusual. The building was large enough that a full circuit took about 25 minutes, and I did 4 or 5 circuits per shift depending on how much time I spent at the desk between rounds. I had done this long enough to know what the building looked like at 2 in the morning and what it looked like at 4, and the difference was mostly just the quality of silence. The first time I noticed something wrong was about 5 months in. I came back to the main floor after a circuit, and one of the stacked pallets near the east loading dock had shifted position. Not dramatically, maybe 3 feet from where I was certain it had been when I passed through. I noted it in the log, attributed it to imprecise memory, and moved on. The second time was 2 weeks later. A rolling equipment cart had moved from one side of the secondary storage room to the other. The room was accessed only by a keycard door, and mine was the only active card assigned to that entrance for the overnight shift. The log showed no other entries. I noted it and said nothing to management. I did not have a good explanation, and I did not want to report something I could not explain clearly. The third time, a personal item of mine, a paperback I kept at the desk, had been moved from the desk to a shelf on the opposite wall. I had not moved it. I was the only person in the building between 10 at night and 6 in the morning. I was certain of this because the entry log was electronic and I checked it. No entries other than mine since my arrival. I bought a small wireless camera from a pharmacy on my way to work the next night. I set it up on the desk facing the main floor, checked that it was recording, and did my first circuit. When I came back to the desk 25 minutes later, my paperback was on the shelf again. I checked the camera footage immediately. The timestamp was continuous, no gap, no interference, no sign of tampering. And on the footage, 9 minutes into my circuit, a door opened in the back wall. A storage room I had checked at the start of the shift and found empty. A man came out, walked to the desk, picked up my book, carried it to the shelf, and returned to the storage room. He closed the door behind him. I had checked that storage room. I had opened the door, looked in with my flashlight, seen nothing, and moved on. What I had not done was check whether the room had a secondary space, a back section separated by shelving that was not visible from the doorway. I called the police from outside the building. I did not go back in. The man had been living in the secondary section of that storage room, apparently, for approximately 3 months based on what they found inside: food packaging, a sleeping arrangement, a phone charger connected to a power strip he had run from the room's single outlet. He knew the security schedule precisely. He timed his movements to the gaps between my circuits. He had been there for 3 months before I noticed anything, and I had only noticed because of the book, and I had only found the camera footage because I had thought to install the camera. Management was informed. The man was charged with trespassing. The investigation found that he had been a former employee who had been terminated 8 months prior and had retained knowledge of the building layout and the security routines. He knew my schedule better than I had realized anyone outside the company could know it. He had timed everything around me for 3 months. The book was the mistake. Moving it was the one thing that introduced a variable I could not explain away. If he had left the book alone, I do not know how long it would have continued. I check every secondary space in every room now before I log it as clear. Every corner, every section divided by shelving, every space that has a door within a door. It adds time to each circuit. I do not skip it. I want to describe what the 3 months looked like in retrospect, because I think the duration is the part that is hardest to absorb. 3 months of passing that storage room. 3 months of checking the door, shining the flashlight in, logging it as clear. 3 months of the building feeling empty in the specific way a building feels empty at 2 in the morning when you are the only person in it, except that I was not the only person in it. The emptiness I was experiencing was a performance. He was in the secondary section of that room, aware of my presence, aware of my schedule, timing his movements around mine. The phone charger connected to a power strip. That detail tells you about the duration and the comfort level. Someone who is in a space for a few nights does not run a power strip. You run a power strip when you are settling in for an extended period, when you need to charge devices regularly, when you are treating the space as a place you are going to be for a while. He had been an employee. He knew the building. He knew that the storage room had a secondary section that was not visible from the door. He knew the security schedule, which had not changed since his employment. He knew that the overnight guard, me, did a 25-minute circuit and returned to the desk for a period before the next one. He had built a functional living situation around that knowledge. The book was my accident and his mistake. I had been leaving it on the desk and picking it up when I came back. He had been moving it, apparently, as a small act of presence, some compulsion to interact with the space in a way that left a mark. I do not know why he moved it. I know that moving it was what exposed him. The detective who worked the case told me that situations like this, where a person with prior knowledge of a building's layout uses that knowledge to occupy a hidden space over an extended period, are more common than most people realize, particularly in commercial and industrial buildings with irregular overnight staffing. She said the most common discovery method was accidental, a maintenance worker finding evidence, a delivery driver noticing something unusual, a security guard noticing a moved object. I was a security guard noticing a moved object. That is the entire reason the situation ended when it did rather than continuing indefinitely. The camera I installed on my own initiative, with my own money, from a pharmacy, is the reason I have the footage. Nothing in my job description or my training had told me to do that. I did it because I had run out of explanations and I needed to know. That instinct, the refusal to keep explaining away something that did not fit, is the thing I am most grateful for from that night. When something moves and you do not move it, that is information. Do not explain it away. Find out what moved it. One more thing about the former employee specifically. He had been terminated 8 months before I found him. That means for 8 months, 3 of which overlapped with his occupation of the storage room, the company had believed he was gone. His access card had been deactivated. His name had been removed from the roster. In every formal sense, he no longer existed in that building. And yet he was there, in the secondary section of a storage room on the main floor, for 3 months of my shift, because none of the formal systems tracked the informal knowledge he had taken with him when he left. The access card was deactivated. The knowledge of the secondary space was not. The knowledge of the security schedule was not. Those things do not deactivate when employment ends. They go with the person. In this case, the person came back. I still work overnight shifts. Different building, different company. On my first night in any new facility, before I log the first room as clear, I find every secondary space, every partition, every section that is not visible from the primary entrance. I make a map. I do not start the shift until I know what I am sharing the building with. I want to be specific about what the profile looked like, because the specificity matters for understanding why I agreed to meet. The photos were current, not clearly filtered, not the kind of obviously curated presentation that you learn to read as a warning sign over time. The conversation was natural and moved at a pace that felt organic rather than scripted. The person I was talking to answered follow-up questions in ways that were consistent with the answers they had given before. Over about 10 days of messaging, I had no reason to believe anything was wrong. We agreed to meet at a coffee place I had suggested, in a neighborhood I knew, on a Saturday afternoon. Specific enough to be a real plan, public enough that I felt comfortable. I arrived first. I found a table near the window and waited. The person who walked in and looked around the room and then walked toward me was not the person from the profile. Not similar, not an older or differently angled version of the photos, genuinely different. Different face, different build, different everything. I said, "I think there might be a mistake." The person sat down. She said there was no mistake. She said she had made the profile and she wanted to meet me. She said she had used photographs that were not her own because she had known I would not have agreed to meet otherwise. I said I was going to leave. She said she understood, but asked if she could say one thing first. I should have left. I stayed for the one thing because I was in a public place and it seemed manageable and I was trying to process what was happening in real time. She said my name. My full name. Then she said the name of the company I worked for, and the neighborhood I lived in, and the name of the coffee place I had suggested for a different reason than she had let me believe. She said she had suggested places in previous conversations specifically to get me to choose this one, which was near where she lived. I did not know her. I was certain of it. I went through every context in which I might have encountered her and found nothing. She was not a former coworker, not a neighbor, not someone from any social circle I could identify. I asked her how she knew those things about me. She said she had been following my account for a long time. She said she felt like she knew me. She said she had seen me in person before, more than once, before she made the profile. I left. I walked to my car and drove away and called a friend from the road. I reported the profile to the platform that evening. They removed it. I reported the incident to the police the following Monday. They took a statement and said they would follow up if the behavior continued or escalated. It did not escalate. I never encountered her again in any context I could identify. That does not mean she was not there. It means I did not see her. What changed for me after that meeting was my understanding of what a profile and a conversation are actually capable of establishing. 10 days of messages, consistent answers, natural pacing, none of that told me who I was talking to. All of it told me who they wanted me to believe I was talking to. Those are different things and I had been treating them as the same. I no longer meet anyone from a dating app without a video call first. Not a brief call or real conversation, long enough that I can verify I am speaking to the person in the photographs. It takes 15 minutes and has eliminated an entire category of risk that I had not previously understood was real. She said she had seen me in person before, more than once, before she made the profile. That sentence is the one I have not been able to put down. She was in the same space as I was in, watching, before there was a profile, before there was a conversation, before I had any reason to be watching back. I did not know. I did not know until she told me. I want to go back to the 10 days of messaging, because I think it deserves more examination than I have given it. The profile had been built with care. The photographs were of a real person, someone whose images had been taken without their knowledge and used without their consent, which is its own violation I think about separately. The bio was specific without being verifiable, general location, general profession, interests that were tailored to match mine based, I believe, on things that were visible on my public accounts. She had done research before she made first contact. The conversation over 10 days was consistent because she had a coherent character to maintain. She had thought about who the profile was, what they would say, how they would answer follow-up questions. That level of preparation is not the work of an impulsive decision. It is the work of someone who had been thinking about this for a while and had invested time in making it work. I think about the period before the profile, when she says she had seen me in person. I have tried to identify which spaces those might have been. My regular coffee place, the grocery store near my apartment, the gym, the route I walk on weekend mornings. All of those are spaces I move through publicly without awareness of being watched, because there was nothing visible that gave me reason to be aware. She was in those spaces. She saw me in them. She built a picture of me from what she observed. And then she built a profile designed to get me to agree to meet her. The 10 days of messaging was the last phase of a process that had started well before I received the first message. By the time I agreed to meet, she already knew more about me than I understood. The meeting was not the beginning. It was the conclusion of something I had not known was happening. The video call requirement I built after this is not just about verifying identity. It is about establishing a checkpoint at which I am actively looking, actively assessing, actively deciding whether to continue rather than being moved along by momentum I did not know had been building. 10 days of good conversation generates momentum. Momentum is not the same as safety. I know that now. I told a close friend about this when it happened. Her response was to ask whether I thought the woman was dangerous. I said I did not know. What I knew was that she had been watching me before I knew she existed, and that is sufficient to take seriously regardless of what the intent behind it was. Watching someone without their knowledge, from multiple locations over an extended period, is not a neutral act. It does not require an explicit threat to be something worth reporting and worth changing your behavior in response to. I reported it. I changed my behavior. I do not meet without a video call first. She said she had seen me before, more than once. That sentence carries everything I need to remember. I want to close with something about the platform's response, because it is relevant to anyone who uses dating apps and believes that the systems in place are sufficient protection. The profile was removed within hours of my report. That is the appropriate and correct response. What the removal does not address is the period before the report, the 10 days the profile existed, the matches it made, the conversations it generated with people who may not have had my specific experience of being met in person and told what was happening. The profile was one of an unknown number of contacts this person had made. I was the one who met her and understood. Others may have met her and not understood, or not reported, or had experiences that did not produce a clear enough incident to describe to a platform or a police department. The removal happened because I reported. The reporting happened because the meeting happened. The meeting happened because I agreed to it based on 10 days of conversation with a profile that was designed specifically to produce my agreement. The system worked at the end. At every step before the end, I was moving through something I did not know I was in. Video call first. Every time. No exceptions for good conversation or natural pacing or profiles that look carefully assembled. Those things are not verification. They are presentation. Verification is the call.